It was a typical Saturday afternoon. A week prior, I had made plans with 3 of my friends to trip on some very potent liquid LSD we had picked up recently. I was given a serious warning from my dealer not to consume more than 3 drops. He sincerely claimed that the vial needed to have a warning label on it. His source had driven several hours to another city just to obtain the acid because it was such a wicked batch. It was supposedly barely diluted. Being my usual skeptical self, I decided I was going to ignore his advice and go balls deep to see what beautiful places my mind could take me to. My friends were very inexperienced with LSD for the most part. One friend, who will be called Jam, had tripped a total of 7 or so times. Another friend, D, a single time, actually 2 days before this trip, and the other friend, Ka, was dropping for his first time for his birthday. The day seemed all too perfect for anything to mess up, despite the fact that during this time in my life, I had had a myriad of personal issues and insecurities that could possibly lead to bad experiences, but I didn't completely take that into account. I'm honestly starting to get slightly uneasy even thinking about the experience I'm about to describe. Around 3:30 p.m., one of my other friends named Kai, who was sober, picked me up from my house. He was with D and Ka, who were minutes away from consuming their acid. We drove to my other friend's house, where my personal stash of acid was sitting in the freezer. The LSD was dropped onto sugar cubes. Our plan was to drive to our friend Jack's house and enjoy the ride in a safe setting, while the people that opted not to trip smoked marijuana. I walked into his house and saw a couple of my friends there. We briefly conversed and smoked a bowl of top-quality CBD-rich sativa marijuana, an antipsychotic chemical in marijuana that reduces anxiety, for a few minutes as a way to ease me into my trip. Haha, yeah right. I believe this is what made the come-up so overwhelmingly fast. I pulled a whopping 5 sugar cubes out of the freezer and shoved them in my mouth, then licked a bunch of sugar crumbles off the foil which came from the edges of the 11 sugar cubes I had in my stash. My friends were a bit shocked I was willing to go that far, but they were already sort of used to my tendency to consume large quantities of psychedelic drugs. I talked with them for another 10 minutes or so, then I went back to the car. On my way to the car, I noticed I was starting to feel increasingly disoriented. It wasn't that euphoric, confusing sort of disorientation. It was more of a I'm losing my fucking mind sort of thing. I felt slightly anxious, but I assumed the negative feelings would pass as soon as the acid took full effect. A couple minutes after I got in the car, D ate 2 sugar cubes and Ka ate 1. I suspect this was easily around 1,000 micrograms. I have consumed 100 plus UG blotter that did not compare at all to this liquid. On a separate occasion, taking 2 of these was enough for a level 4 experience, hallucinations, ESP, and OBEs. This experience was about to get very, very ugly. To give a little perspective on the unfathomable effects of 1,000 microgram doses, here's a quote from the Nobel Prize winning chemist Kary Mullis that ingested 1,000 micrograms for his first dose. When you take 1,000 micrograms of LSD, you don't know you've taken anything. It just feels like that's the way it is. You might suddenly find yourself sitting on a building in Egypt 3,000 years ago, watching boats on the Nile. Yes, it is that fucking crazy. 10 minutes into the car ride, and 20 minutes after eating the sugar cubes, I was rapidly losing all touch with reality. I started wondering what the fuck was going on around me, and why I was feeling so uncomfortable. I started telling my friends I was really scared, and the intense anxiety was gripping every single fiber of my body. I thought I was going to die, and that this trip was going to last until the end of eternity. By the minute, I was starting to panic more. This was only the beginning of an unimaginable nightmare that would show me the evil side of LSD and completely change my opinion about the drug in general. 25 minutes after taking the sugar cubes, we arrived at Jack's house. By that time, I was stumbling all over the place, and I was already having severe visual distortion. All movements were followed by strobing trails composed of detailed patterns, kaleidoscopes, and rainbows. These visuals that I would have, usually considered beautiful, were now viewed as a reminder that I was in the middle of a trip that I so desperately wanted to end. When I got inside his house, I saw a few more of my friends sitting on the couch. My body temperature had elevated to the point that I thought I was burning alive. I was completely out of my body and almost felt like I was on a high dose of ketamine. I felt embarrassed because I obviously looked like I couldn't handle my shit. Maybe this was just an extreme amplification of my general self-esteem issues. Their faces were assuming demonic forms. I fled to Jack's room. I was already starting to experience ego loss. I was going in and out of consciousness. This is the point where I lost track of time, so there's no point of trying to estimate anything. Jack followed me to his room and did his best to comfort me and talk me out of my bad trip. It was a completely ineffective attempt. A couple minutes later, I started crying hysterically. Everything was getting darker. I fell into the most depressive state of my life, combined with the most acute sense of panic I've ever experienced. The floor was covered in spiraling kaleidoscopes that were rapidly shifting colors. I heard thousands of voices call me names like pussy and bitch. The room reeked of sewage and feces. This was the most negative emotion a human being could ever fathom. I so desperately wanted to kill myself, but I was immobilized and unable to move. I realized that the voices were all the people I resented in my life the most. Cartoon blood was all over the ceiling and the walls. My vision seemed to stretch off into infinity. I was hallucinating so much, I couldn't fucking believe it. I could see many different events of my life playing out as if it was waking reality. Try and imagine being inside of a Saw movie firsthand, but 1,000 times more horrifying and traumatic. There was a moment in which my mind would shoot out of my body 2 feet in front of me and then return into my body. And this looped over and over again for what felt like forever at an impossible speed. Time was non-existent, and each second felt like forever, not hours, not days, but an infinite amount of time. I kept hearing this bizarre futuristic noise that sounded like a computer glitching. The whole room was flashing, as if something was flicking the on switch for a lamp up and down repeatedly. My jaw was rapidly vibrating like I had taken 300 milligrams of MDMA. I had full-blown synesthesia. Everything was one. Everything was infinitely interconnected. I would look at the walls and become them. I would look at the floor, then become the floor, looking back at my body in a dissociative fashion. I was unable to differentiate any part of the outside world from my own physical body. The concept of I was now a mere construct of my mind, and I was nothing more than a complex bundle of atoms and molecules. The floor started to wither away and die. It was as if it had human emotions and was feeling every bit of suffering I was going through at the time. Everything started to turn blood red. I was going straight to the depths of hell. Matrix numbers were literally exploding out of the ground and shooting up and down the walls. I felt like I was on DMT, only it was 1,000 times more intense. Somehow, just a little while after this part of the trip, I regained some degree of consciousness. I stumbled to the backyard where a group of 8 or so people were sitting, and I was watching the sky and everything in my external environment turning black and red. I could barely see anything. My vision was almost completely shot. I forgot that I even had a body at this point, and I had absolutely no control over my muscular movements. I was in the survival mode, where my mind was on autopilot, and I had no idea that I was on drugs. I lost balance and fell backward onto the ground. I continued to see more incredible vortexes of Matrix-style numbers and letters spurred out from every direction. During my friends' attempts to help restore me to sanity, they asked if I knew what time it was. I responded with 8 a.m. when it was late in the afternoon. That was quite enough of a response to prove I was completely and utterly going nuts, and there was no real way to help me. Once night fell, I was full-on peeking in Jack's room. I began to literally have no idea who I was, where I was, or what drug I was on, or what drugs were in the first place. I knew that I was going to die, and nothing could be done to stop it. At some point at the beginning of the peak, I realized that I could not recognize the room I was in. Suddenly, I started seeing several cop cars pull into the room and put their sirens on. Yellow caution tape magically appeared around them as well. This was one of my worst nightmares coming to life before my very eyes. There was a line of already arrested criminals in handcuffs next to the cop cars, and they were all complaining that I'd snitched on them for some unspecified reason. I knew I was in for absolute hell. Before I could see what was going to happen next, everything started fading to white. I could see nothing but burning white light, like I was looking directly at the sun from 100 feet away. What I saw was the ultimate truth, the answer to every question, the reason reality is the way that it is. I existed within the past, present, and future simultaneously. I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. I dissolved into infinity. I was existing in an infinite number of dimensions, living an infinite number of lives simultaneously for an infinite amount of time. Though my memory of this is hazy, I believe I relived every event of my entire life during the peak. I could fit our entire universe into a period at the end of a sentence. Time was a point of nothingness. I was everything, yet I was nothing. I was in pure ecstasy. I felt the unconditional love of the universe penetrating every pore of my body. If only this could have lasted forever. I suppose this was a taste of the beautiful part of ego death, but my stay in this ineffable place was cut short when I was suddenly catapulted into hyperspace, where I experienced every ounce of pain any human being could ever possibly experience at one time. The love rapidly shifted to evil in its purest definition. I saw many miserable people I had seen throughout my life, including the homeless and starving. My brain sensory filter was gone. Every last bit of information that could physically be processed at once was flowing through my head at light speed. I was dropped out of hyperspace, directly into a hallucinatory prison facility. I saw hundreds of pit bulls, white supremacists, and naked black men running around. It was a state of sheer pandemonium. I have never been so unbelievably horrified in my entire life. I was now sure that this is where I would die. I was taken to the showers where I was bitten repeatedly by pit bulls and raped by the white supremacists and black men simultaneously. I was sobbing hysterically, screaming for it to stop. It was physical and emotional torture beyond your wildest dreams. I felt every single sensation, including their penises in my anus and the razor-sharp teeth of the vicious dogs. Who knows how long this actually went on for, but eventually, this torture ended and I was back in Jack's room. I saw all of my friends' faces covered in knife wounds and deep, bleeding cuts. Puddles of blood were all over the room. My joints were still in severe pain from the physical torture I had just experienced. I looked at the clock and it read 9 p.m. or something along those lines. Minutes after I came back to Earth, I realized that the purpose for human existence was to love. Love is our higher purpose. I now understood that the ego I had developed my entire life was an illusion all along. Our egos push us away from our ability to feel compassion towards others. As your ego fades away, you slowly dissolve into pure, unadulterated love. The illusion of separation created by our egos has been the root cause of suffering all across our planet, and sadly, this is the reason the majority of the world kills each other for absurd purposes like religion and resources. Religions like Christianity hide behind the idea that there is an afterlife because they are afraid of death. There is nothing to fear because when you die, there is no you to fear anything. The only thing that separates us from other forms of life is our ability to think. Our ego is composed of our thoughts. When we stop relying on our ego, we cannot experience negative emotions. When we stop thinking, our ego ceases to exist, and then we can live a life of pure love, peace, and prosperity. The more we rely on our ego, the more we push ourselves away from the moment, which is all. Nothing inside the moment we are in right now will ever exist. Yesterday never is, and tomorrow will never be. Time is infinite. The past, present, and future are all occurring simultaneously. We are merely observers. Free will is an illusion. I quickly forgot all of these things within the 15 minutes of the peak ending. I did not fully understand the lessons I learned until many months after the trip. The next day was easily the worst day of my life, excluding the trip. I felt so self-conscious about myself that suicide was all I could think about. I was thoroughly convinced that I had ruined my life permanently. During ego death, I became aware of the severity of my many mental disorders. I realized that throughout my entire life, I had been looked down upon as a special kid. I had not been aware of this until that moment. I felt like I was the most inferior form of life on the face of the earth. After I got home, I burst into tears. I even thought my family felt sorry for me and had pitied me my whole life because they thought I was a moron. I had a psychotic break for weeks afterward. This was easily the most traumatic thing I have ever gone through in my entire life and has left a lasting mark on me that I carry to this day. It's been over 6 months now, and I think about this trip every day of my life. It's nothing any human being ever deserves to go through, and I would never wish it on my worst enemy. Over time, this trip has had a profound impact on all areas of my life, in both positive and negative ways. The positive. I have very close friends now, and rather than the special kid, many people now view me as a very insightful and intelligent person. Before this experience, I had very, very few friends. I wasn't close friends with the ones mentioned in this report, but we chilled every once in a while. I now know what true friendship is. I go to parties. I meet new people all the time. I suspect I used to have a mild form of autism, and this trip literally eradicated it. My entire family has mentioned multiple times that I am a transformed person. I have fully developed social skills. I act normally now. I view everyone I meet as a part of my own consciousness. I've earned excellent grades at my community college and have grown tremendously. Multiple people have commented that I'm an entirely different person. I've taken up Buddhism and adopted a very spiritual lifestyle. The negative. Several months ago, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I suspect I was already predisposed to this condition, but my trip brought it out. I still have mental flashbacks nearly every day and have been scarred by this experience. I frequently have nightmares about this trip. My thoughts can be very scattered and clouded at times. My thinking is very impaired on some days, but it's very sporadic. I've also learned how fucked up our world is, and sometimes I feel that ignorance is bliss. Our society disgusts me. I do believe that the human race is a joke. I'm gonna say one thing. Do not take a high dose of acid unless you have a proper set and setting, or it can turn into the worst nightmare of your entire life. 300 micrograms is more than enough to have a spiritual experience. 1,000+ micrograms did not provide a near-death experience. It provided a beyond-death experience. LSD is a seriously powerful drug, and it has the ability to fuck a person like nothing they could ever conceive of. In fact, after this experience, I firmly believe it is the most powerful drug known to the human race. No one wants to have the thought that your best friend could be dead, but in an instant, what I thought would be a fun date with 2 other girls turned out to be the most terrifying night of my life. Before that cold October night, I never looked at life the same, because I never had to stare death straight in the face. Nelson is my closest friend who normally has a good head on his shoulders, but like all of us, makes mistakes now and then. I met him in kindergarten, and we have been brothers ever since. That's why when his life was on the line, I gave everything I had to keep him alive. It all started when I got a call from him one night, and he wanted to know if I wanted to go out with him and 2 sophomore girls that we knew at the time. Hell yeah, I said, like usual. I could always count on Nelson to introduce me to cool girls. So he came and picked me up with his truck, and like usual, we both brought a sizable amount of liquor. But in no way was this night going to be anywhere near usual. "Are you ready to get messed up tonight, dude?" he screamed as I entered the truck. "Definitely," I replied, because at that moment, I was ready to get inebriated and have a good time. But if I could have seen the future, I would have poured out our bottles and stayed at home. We then headed to pick up the girls at their house. After we got them, we spent a couple of minutes deciding what to do. I know of a treehouse near some office buildings that people would party at. When we arrived, we started to walk in the woods that the treehouse was in. I was ready to start drinking when Nelson made a comment to me that I regretfully neglected. "I'm so ready to get ripped," I said. "Dude, I've already had 10 shots, he replied. "No, you didn't, you liar." I joked with him because I had never known him to drink so excessively that quick. We forged our way through the dense woods on the way to the tree. We finally made it there and climbed up the ladder to a wooden platform with handrails on all sides. We all took our seats, and I began to swig my vodka down as Nelson began to speak. "Man, I'm so pissed that football season is over. I can't believe that I'm never going to play again, and I didn't even get the playing time I wanted this season." I could tell he wasn't being himself as he started to gulp down his raspberry vodka. "Dude, calm down on that vodka if you've already had 10 shots, I said. "Don't worry about me, I'll be fine," he replied. But I should have worried about him because I knew the dangers of alcohol poisoning and that the stuff is literally a poison and will kill you if too much is consumed. He took a few more swigs and said, "I'll be right back, I have to go take a piss." He scaled down the ladder, and little did I know, that would be the last time he was conscious for the rest of the night. I just kept drinking and talking to the girls when I realized that Nelson was taking longer than he should. I called out to him below, but there was nothing but silence. Peering over the edge, I could see him laying stomach down amongst the leaves and the dirt. I knew something was wrong if he was passed out at 10 o'clock. I tried yelling at him to wake up, but I got no answer. I then carefully scaled down the ladder and walked up to him. I was disgusted at the sight of him pathetically lying down in his own urine. The girls eventually made their way down to see what the commotion was all about. They had obviously never witnessed anything like that because I could tell that they were frightened. "Nelson!" I yelled over and over again in his ear, hoping he would regain consciousness. I have known him to be an extremely deep sleeper and wanted to make sure he wasn't just taking a quick snooze, so I yelled at the top of my lungs, "Nelson, if you don't get your ass up right now, I'm gonna call the paramedics and you'll go to the hospital." When he was still silent after that, I knew something had to be done. I spent a good 5 minutes hollering profanities and punching trees in anger. I knew the only thing that I could do was to take him back to his house and deal with his parents. I got a hold of him and tried to lift him off the ground, but I had no leverage. "Grab his arms and sit him up," I told the girls. Then I threw him over my shoulder. I never realized how heavy a human body can be, especially when it is hanging over your shoulder limp. We slowly cleared our way through the brush, while I was having an especially hard time maneuvering through the trees carrying that 160 pounds. His weight was just bearing down on me, and I collapsed to my knees, spilling his body onto the dirt. I couldn't bear to pick him up again, so I began to drag him up the hill to where his car was. I eventually collapsed and started hitting the ground. I was physically and emotionally drained and was obviously in no position to drive. I called my friends Landon and Chris, and they drove to the office buildings and started heading down the hill towards us. "Oh my God, how long has he been like this?" asked Chris. "I'm not sure. He was fine 1 minute and then just out the next," I said. I was still a little intoxicated, even though an incident like this can sober someone up very quickly. Now with 3 of us, we easily lifted him and put him in Landon's car. After all of the commotion, he finally showed a sign of life and began to vomit all over Landon's back seat. Although I felt very sorry for Landon, I was glad to see that Nelson was moving around. The girls got picked up by their friend, and Landon drove me in Nelson's truck, while Chris chauffeured Nelson. I was mortified when we got to his house. His parents are very strict, and his father was not only the leader of our church youth group, but also my godfather. We went to the front door and rang the doorbell. His mom answered it, and it was well past midnight. The first thing she said was, "Where's Nelson?" She seemed concerned, like she knew something was wrong. "He had a little too much to drink tonight, and he is in Landon's car," I said, trying to soften the blow. We all went out to the car and pulled him out of the back seat. His father was the only thing holding him up, while his mom slapped him and yelled for him to wake up, but she was just as unlucky as me in her attempts to awaken him. The only thing left to do was call an ambulance to take him to the nearby hospital. He was now in God's hands. After a sleepless night watching Nelson's house and little brother with Chris and Landon, my mom came to pick me up in the morning before they brought him home. I drove with my mom to the scene of the horrific night where I retrieved Nelson's cell phone, belt, and shoes, which had all been strewn about in my struggle to drag him to safety. My mom told me that he was doing fine, but we were lucky that he didn't pass away. The hospital had to pump out the excessive amounts of vodka and force-fed him charcoal to induce vomiting. That long night of terror turned out to be a turning point in my young life. I fully understood that one big mistake can have a greater effect on the people around me than I might think. I felt as if the recreational use of alcohol wasn't worth the risk if it had the potential to murder my best friend. Nelson is now attending Texas Tech University and is still drinking excessively, which leads me to believe that even when the correct answer to our problems drags us in the dirt and throws us on a stretcher, we never fully learn from our mistakes. Back during high school, I once went into the woods with some friends to smoke a massive amount of weed and then go to the local ice skating rink and arcade. We all had brought our own bags of weed and had a couple of pipes. We sat and smoked for quite a while. Now, all but one of us had just plain weed. One kid, without knowing, had bought some weed laced heavily with angel dust. I always was the old iron lungs, so after everyone else had had enough, I kept going. But the only bag left was the lace kind. So I smoked the rest of the bag, and it had been half full. This bag had been about a nice 30 bag. Anyway, so now we are all done, and we head to the sporting center, but immediately we noticed something wasn't right. We had to take a trail through the woods to get there, and we all noticed that it felt as though the ground were tipping back and forth and balance was extremely difficult to maintain. Also, we noticed we weren't able to feel very much, and we were getting some tunnel vision. Somehow, though, we made it to the place, and we went inside. We thought better than to go ice skating, as that could be quite dangerous considering our states at the time. However, we went into the arcade, and we started to feel violent. There was one of those games where you hit the plate with a giant mallet, and it sends the little thing up to hit the ball if you win. There was no mallet, so in my altered state of mind, I punched the metal plate as hard as I could, and it easily rang the bell. It also left some blood from my badly damaged hand behind on the plate. I didn't feel anything from this until a couple days later, but I will get to that. I then went to go play laser tag in this blacklight arena with loud music and crazy light effects. I got very paranoid and thought that the red flashing lights were the police. I saw another player come around a corner and shoot me with the laser gun. I thought he was a cop at the time, so I punched him square in the face and ran. My friends realized that the police would soon actually be there, as they were more in control than me because they had smoked less of the dust. They dragged me out of the door screaming, and we ran into the woods towards home. Before the laser tag, I had spent a lot of time at the arcade, so this running into the woods is roughly 8 hours after having smoked. I got home with my one friend who sleeps over. I then wake up the next morning and still feel just as crazily high as the night before. It didn't worry me. I just figured I had done a lot the last night and it would wear off in a couple hours. Unfortunately for me, the feeling lingered on for 5 days. I felt flu-like symptoms with it, but also could barely feel much, and I felt extremely dissociated and disoriented. I had to go to school like this too. It was terrible. My other friends who did it had the same problem I did. One of them lasted 5 days, and 2 others lasted only 3 days. It was a frightening experience, and I don't think I will ever do that stuff again. Last week, I bought a box of Dramamine containing 30 pills, each pill containing 50 milligrams of dimenhydrinate. Yesterday, I decided to take them and see what would happen. The set. I was bored, stressed out after a long day of work, and I was filled with hate for everything. The setting. It was late Friday night. I live by myself in a small apartment, and I have a cat who keeps me company. The dosage. 1500 milligrams of dimenhydrinate. First, I took 4 pills and waited some 30 minutes. Absolutely nothing. Then I took 2 more pills and waited some 30 minutes. Again, nothing. I ended up repeating this process of taking 2 pills at a time and waiting until I would notice any effects. In the end, I ingested 1500 milligrams of the shit in total. I took all of the 30 pills and only felt somewhat heavier and a little drunk, probably because I was also drinking some vodka. I was so frustrated and angry that nothing out of the ordinary was happening, so I gave up and went to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night feeling nauseous and didn't have enough time to reach the bathroom, so I puked on my bedroom floor. It was too dark to see anything, and I felt very heavy and disoriented. I decided that I would clean it up in the morning, then I went back to sleep. I woke up in the morning feeling weird. While I was getting up, I looked down and saw a small pool of black goo splattered on the floor. I was shocked. What the fuck was that? Then I remembered that I had to puke during the night and came to realize that the black goo was my vomit. I was even more shocked and disgusted. Why did I puke some disgusting black goo? What was in that? I had no idea, so I grabbed a small tool that looks like a trowel and proceeded to take small samples of the vomit to look closer and try to find out what it was. I smelt it. It had a very sweet but also very sickly smell. It was one of the most disgusting things I had ever seen. Eventually, I finished cleaning the floor, and to this day, I have absolutely no idea what that was. I stumbled into the living room, feeling very heavy and spaced out. Suddenly, I look into the other bedroom where I keep the litter box for my cat, and there he was, sitting next to it. I found it strange that he was looking directly at me in the eyes. I walked closer to the bedroom door and kept looking at him. He didn't move or blink. He seemed to be paralyzed. If you own a cat, you probably know that cats don't maintain eye contact with someone for a prolonged period of time. They always tend to look somewhere else, then look back at you. He was absolutely not doing this, and for whatever reason, his eyes were making an expression of hatred, like a human when you are furious and you give someone an angry look. Cats don't fucking do that. Animals don't do that. But there he was, looking directly at me, deep in my eyes, emitting anger and hatred towards me. Suddenly, I felt a horrible shiver down my spine. It even reached to the back of my head. I was extremely shocked by my cat's expression. I called him, put food in his bowl. He didn't move. He was fucking petrified. When I tried to get closer to him, he kept following me with his demonic eyes. I was so scared that I screamed at him. He ran out of the bedroom, still following me with his hateful eyes. This went on for maybe 30 minutes until I was too tired to try to understand what was going on. I lived by myself, but I felt his hatred towards me, and this hatred started spreading all over my apartment. I felt like everything hated me and was angry at me. I felt like complete shit. Shivers kept going down my spine, and I started feeling like mosquitoes were biting me all the time. That's when I started noticing some very small black dots on the living room floor. I knelt down, looked closer, and realized that the little black dots were actually dark red, and they had legs. They looked exactly like minuscule ticks. Then I remembered I had read somewhere that seeing spiders and other bugs was very common. Then I was absolutely sure that the drug was indeed working, and I quickly started to regret having consumed 1500 milligrams of that shit, because suddenly I started feeling a weird rush through my body. I felt like I was about to faint, so I laid down on my bed and started breathing deeply, trying to calm down. I was about to call an ambulance because I thought I was going to die. I started seeing black dots all over my bed, and when I looked closer, there they were, those fucking ticks. I got up, terrified, went to the living room. The demonic cat of Satan was there, paralyzed, emitting his utter hatred towards me. The more I maintained eye contact with him, the more demonic he appeared. It was truly hell. I was extremely paranoid, started hearing faint voices, seeing things out of the corner of my eyes, some objects and walls around the apartment, had this very weird, jagged transparent outlines which would start shaking uncontrollably the more I focused on them. Everything that happened sent me into some paranoid state, as I believed the apartment had some extremely demonic presence, like every single object was now emitting hatred towards me. I felt like I went to sleep in the normal dimension and woke up in an alternate dimension, and I was begging for it to end. I was never so scared in my entire life. By the way, I'm 30 years old. If I could describe this experience using only 3 words, I would definitely say hatred, hell, and nightmare. I started shaking and sweating uncontrollably with fear. My hands were shaking like I had a severe case of Alzheimer's. I tried to use my phone to talk to a friend, but I was shocked to realize that I could not read because everything was extremely blurry. No matter how much I tried, I could not read anything at all. I tried to type some message to my friend, but as I couldn't read and my hands were almost out of control, I typed some random letters, to which my friend replied, "What?" I didn't even try to contact anyone else. I was completely shocked and wanted this nightmare to end. My mouth was starting to get extremely dry. I think I spent the day in my bedroom, watching videos on YouTube, trying to ignore the hell I was now locked in. Sometimes when I was watching gaming-related videos, the voices of people talking in the video started getting distorted, like they were speaking in slow motion. Whenever some guy was talking, his voice would distort and I would hear something like Satan's voice, and sometimes when I was really paying attention to what they were saying, their speech slowly became a word salad. It was so horrifying. It truly felt demonic, like the devil was trying to communicate with me through some sort of wordplay. I was almost wishing death to escape this nightmare. I was having severe panic attacks every 30 minutes where I believed I was dying. I kept enduring this hell the entire day. Eventually that night I went to sleep because I started feeling somewhat better. The next morning, I still couldn't read, but the panic attacks were gone and my cat appeared to be normal again. Today, I swore to myself that I would never try or even touch any other psychedelic for the rest of my life. I think that dimethylhydronate pills should be nicknamed the Satanic Delirious Nightmare Pill. I learned my lesson, and thankfully, I survived.